It's funny how the biggest betrayals don't announce themselves. They don't arrive with a thunderclap. They slide into your inbox on a Tuesday afternoon with a subject line that's almost offensively cheerful. For me, it was, "Big celebration for Lana." My mother's name was next to it, a little exclamation point dancing at the end as if it were the best news in the world. I was in my apartment, the one in LA that costs a fortune to be this small, staring at my laptop. The cursor on page 84 of my script blinked at me, patient. For 3 years, that blinking cursor had been my most consistent companion. My tea was cold. I'd been so deep in the scene I was wrestling with, trying to get the grandmother's dialogue just right, making it sound like her without turning it into caricature, that I'd forgotten it was there. This is my life. It's a collection of cold teas, late nights lit by the blue glare of a screen, and the constant, gnawing feeling that I'm running a race everyone else finished years ago. I'm 29, a screenwriter, or, as my parents would say, a girl with a cute hobby. I clicked on the email. The familiar sting wasn't sharp anymore. After a lifetime, it had dulled into a sort of background ache, like a joint that acts up when it's about to rain. It was an invitation, a digital card with champagne flutes clinking, a celebratory dinner at Vitrina, a place so high-end you have to whisper your order. The occasion? My younger sister, Lana, had landed a huge career success. Details, it said, would follow. Of course they would. The announcement would be a performance, and I was being given my ticket, not a role. It didn't mention what the success was. I realize now that the vagueness was the point. It was a hook, designed to make me call, to put me in the position of asking for information about my own family's good news. It was a small, almost imperceptible power play. For years, my life had been an accumulation of these tiny paper cuts, 1,000 little moments that reminded me of my place. I leaned back in my chair, the worn leather groaning. My gaze drifted around my apartment. It was more of a studio, really. My bed was in the corner, my desk was the centerpiece, and my kitchen was a 2-foot-wide counter. But every inch of it was mine. On the wall was a framed poster for Chinatown, the screenplay a perfect brutalist masterpiece. Next to it, a corkboard was buried under a collage of index cards, a rainbow of scenes, plot points, and snippets of dialogue for the script on my screen. My script. Final Draft. That was its title. It was the story of our grandmother, a fierce woman who escaped a revolution with nothing but the clothes on her back and a notebook of family recipes that read more like poetry. It was the most personal, most important thing I had ever written. I could already hear my father's voice at some future family gathering. "Maya's still doing her little writing thing," he'd say with a dismissive wave of his hand. "But Lana's in the business. She's a doer." To them, Lana's job as an assistant at a production agency was a real job. It had a salary, benefits, a clear trajectory. My passion, the thing that consumed my every waking thought, was an eccentricity, a phase they hoped I'd outgrow, like my high school goth period. I'd watch Lana at Christmas, casually dropping names she'd overheard in the office, and my parents would hang on every word. She'd borrow my ideas for pitches, little concepts I'd brainstormed out loud. A sci-fi concept about memory, a historical drama about a female spy. I always told myself it was sisterly sharing. I see now it was practice. She was testing the locks on my doors long before she decided to break them down. What I didn't understand then was that they didn't just prefer Lana's path. They were fundamentally embarrassed by mine. My pursuit of art was a reflection of their failure to steer me toward something practical, something they could brag about to their friends. Lana was their redemption. Her sensible shoes and corporate email signature absolved them. My blinking cursor was a quiet accusation. The phone rang, shattering the silence. It was Lana. Her name flashed on my screen, and for a half-second I felt a surge of warmth. Maybe this was the call with the details. Maybe she was excited to tell me herself. I was a fool. "Maya? Oh my God, you are not going to believe this." Her voice was a high-pitched squeal, breathless and performative. She was already playing to an audience. "Hey, Lana. What's up? I just got Mom's email," I said, trying to sound casual. "Forget the email. This is it. It happened. I sold a script." The words hung in the air. For a moment, I felt a dizzying surge of pride for her. Maybe she'd finally done it, written something herself, something real. "Wow, Lana. That's amazing. What's it about?" And then she said it. The sentence that rearranged my world. "It's the story about Grandma," she said, her voice giddy. "You know, about her escape, the recipe book, all of it. I wrote it, and oh my God, Maya, they loved it. They said it was the most authentic thing they'd read all year. Leo Vance is attached to Star. My pulse didn't race. It wasn't a hot, panicked feeling. It was something worse. Stillness. A complete and total cessation of everything. The air in my lungs turned to glass. I could feel the cold surface of my desk under my forearm, the faint vibration of the laptop's fan. My script, the one on my screen right now, the one titled Final Draft, was about Grandma. It was about the revolution. It was about the recipe book. It was the story I had bled for, scene by scene, for 3 years. "Lana," I said. My own voice sounded alien, a distant recording. "That's my script. That's Final Draft." There was a flicker of a pause, a tiny, almost imperceptible beat of silence where the lie was born. "What? Maya, what are you talking about? This is my script. I wrote it." And then, the masterstroke. "Oh my God," she gasped, her voice suddenly dripping with wounded theatricality. "Wait, Mom, Dad, are you on?" Of course they were. A three-way call. This wasn't a call, it was an ambush. My father's voice boomed through the speaker, impatient and angry. "Maya, what is the meaning of this? Your sister calls with the best news of her life, and you try to steal her thunder?" "Don't be so dramatic, Maya," my mother added, her voice a familiar chorus of disappointment. "It's a wonderful idea. Why can't you just be happy for her? Honestly, where would you even get an idea like that?" Where would I even get an idea like that? The question echoed in the sudden, cavernous space that had opened up inside my chest. From Grandma herself. From the nights I spent with her as a child, recording her stories on an old cassette player. From the shoebox of her letters I'd spent months translating. From every ounce of my soul that I had poured onto the page. But they didn't see that. They saw Lana, their doer, and me, their dreamer. And in their world, dreamers don't create things of value. "I wrote it," I repeated, but the words had no air behind them. They were ghosts. "I have the file right here. I've been working on it for 3 years. "Oh, Maya," my mother sighed, the sound weaponized with pity. "You and your stories. Don't ruin this for Lana. She has worked so hard. This is the first real success in this family." The first real success. There it was. The final cut. The quiet, creative life I had built for myself wasn't real. The sacrifices, the rejections, the sheer force of will it took to sit in this chair day after day and create something from nothing. It was all imaginary. A cute hobby. My sister stealing my work was a success. Me claiming it was jealousy. The line went dead. They had delivered their verdict and hung up. I sat there, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. I didn't cry. The emotional dam didn't break. It froze. The hurt was so absolute, so profound, it solidified into something cold and hard and clear. It was a diamond of pure pain. And in that chilling stillness, I saw everything. I saw the lifetime of small dismissals, the casual thefts, the calculated praise for one daughter and the weary tolerance for the other. It wasn't a series of disconnected events. It was a single, sustained act of erasure. I calmly placed the phone down. My hands were steady, but my jaw ached from clenching it so hard. I turned back to my laptop. The cursor for page 84 was still blinking. I clicked on the file menu, my movements precise and deliberate. I opened the script file from the beginning. There it was. Title page. Final Draft, written by Maya Allister. My name. my work, my soul. I looked at it for a long, silent moment. Then I navigated back to my inbox. The invitation with the clinking champagne flutes was still open. My finger hovered over the RSVP button. They expected me to hide, to lick my wounds, to dissolve into a puddle of impotent rage. They expected the dreamer to go back to her dreams. But they had miscalculated. They had pushed me past the point of pain and into the realm of purpose. They wanted a performance. I would give them one. I clicked the button. Will you be attending? Yes. I closed the laptop. The silence in my apartment was no longer empty. It was full of a cold, quiet resolve. They had built their entire narrative around my weakness, my jealousy, my failure. They were about to find out what happened when the character they'd written went off script. My final thought before the night began was not a plea or a question or a cry. It was a short, sharp declaration of intent. Let them think I'm broken. The morning after felt different. The LA sun, which usually just feels like a spotlight exposing my apartment's dust, seemed sharper, more clinical. The frozen diamond of pain inside my chest hadn't melted overnight. If anything, it had clarified. Yesterday I was a victim. Today I was an archivist. The goal wasn't to build a case to plead with my family. I knew with a certainty that was as calm and deep as a frozen lake that their verdict was in. No, this new methodical work was for me. It was the process of gathering the scattered pieces of my own reality and cementing them into a foundation so solid that their gaslighting could never breach it again. My first act was to open my laptop. I didn't open the script itself, not yet. I went to the master folder on my hard drive, the one simply labeled Writing. Inside was the project folder for Final Draft. I right-clicked, selected Get Info, and there it was. The first piece of undeniable truth presented in the cold, emotionless font of the operating system. Date created, October 14th, 2021. 3 years, 3 years of my life, time-stamped. It wasn't an opinion. It wasn't a feeling. It was a fact. I took a screenshot. The quiet click of the capture felt more definitive than any scream. This wasn't about proving it to them. It was about holding a piece of digital stone in my hand and knowing its weight. Next, I went to my bookshelf. Tucked behind a row of screenwriting manuals was a stack of journals. I pulled out the one from 2022, its black moleskin cover soft with wear. My handwriting inside was a frantic scrawl. The ink bled through in places from pressure. I flipped through the pages, past grocery lists and random anxieties, until I found the entry I was looking for. I had just spent a week with Grandma before she'd had her fall, and the words tumbled out of me. She told me about the border crossing again I had written, but this time she mentioned the soldier who let her pass. He didn't say a word. He just looked at her worn-out shoes, then at the locket around her neck, the one with the tiny, faded picture of Grandpa, and just nodded. Not with pity, but with a kind of shared exhaustion. She said his silence was the kindest thing anyone had ever given her. That silence is the whole point. The mercy isn't in the words, it's in the space between them. I have to get that into the script. That one quiet nod is the entire climax. I ran my fingers over the page. That scene, the one with the silent soldier, was the heart of my screenplay. I could already imagine Lana, sitting at the head of the table at Vitrina, telling everyone how that powerful moment of quiet mercy had come to her in a dream. The thought didn't make me angry. Not anymore. It was like watching a bad actor prepare to go on stage to deliver your lines. The performance was contemptible, but my focus was on the script, the original text, the truth. I took a clear photo of the journal entry with my phone, another receipt for my own sanity. My mind then jumped to an earlier memory, back when Final Draft was just a chaotic, 150-page mess. I'd been so lost in it, so unsure if the core idea was any good. On a whim, I had emailed the first 40 pages to Dr. Albright, my old college screenwriting professor. He was a terrifyingly sharp man who didn't believe in praise unless it was rigorously earned. I spent an hour searching through my sent mail folder, my heart beginning to beat a little faster. The search felt desperate, a prayer to my past self to have had the foresight. And then I found it. The subject line read, "Question from a former student, Maya Allister." The email itself was mortifyingly earnest. "Dear Dr. Albright," it began, "you probably don't remember me, but I was in your advanced screenwriting seminar in 2018. I'm working on a personal script, inspired by my grandmother's life, and I feel like I'm too close to it. I've attached the first act. I know you're incredibly busy, but any feedback on whether this is a story worth telling would mean the world." My breath hitched. Attached to the email was a PDF, final draft Acton V2 PDF, dated May 2022. I clicked on it, and my own words, my own early, clumsy, beautiful words, filled the screen. It was all there. I scrolled down, my eyes scanning his reply. He'd been kind, direct. "Maya," he'd written, "it's raw, and the structure needs work, but the voice is there. The scene with the recipe book is a gem. Don't you dare give up on this one." A tear finally escaped. Just one. Not of sadness, but of profound, aching relief. It was a ghost from my past reaching out to tell me I wasn't crazy. I had the email. I had the attachment. I had his validation. It was an external anchor in the storm of my family's denial. Screenshot. Save. Another brick in my foundation. As I waited for the evening to arrive, I did something I knew would be painful. I opened an industry blog, one of the big ones that announces all the deals. It didn't take long to find the article. "Newcomer Lana Allister sells spec final draft to major studio in 7-figure deal. Leo Vance attached." Newcomer. The word was a slap. And under the headline was a professional headshot of Lana I'd never seen before, smiling a confident, toothy smile. Below that was the quote. "The writing process was a grueling spiritual journey," Lana was quoted as saying. "This story is in my bones. It came to me in a dream, almost fully formed, and it was my responsibility to bring it to life. My grandmother was such an inspiration, and I just felt her guiding my hand the entire time." Guiding your hand? The hypocrisy was so audacious it was almost sublime. It wasn't just a lie. It was a performance of the highest caliber. She was playing the part of the tortured artist, the divine vessel for a story that she had picked out of my soul like a pocket watch from an unlocked coat. The real theft, I was beginning to understand, wasn't the script. That was just intellectual property. The real theft was of my history, my connection to our grandmother, my grief, and my love. She was monetizing my identity, and my family was holding the door open for her. The anger I felt now was different. It had shifted. It was no longer a wounded cry of how could they do this to me. It had morphed into a quiet, cold question. How did I let them make me feel so small for so long? I wasn't just mourning the theft of my work. I was mourning the version of myself who had spent years desperately craving the approval of people who were incapable of giving it. That girl was gone. They had killed her. The hours ticked by. I showered. I chose an outfit, a simple black dress. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that screamed for attention. My armor would be my composure. As I was about to leave, a final thought snagged in my mind, a loose thread I hadn't considered. The script contest. The article mentioned Lana won the grand prize in the Westmoreland screenwriting competition, which is what got the script in front of the studio in the first place. I went to the competition's website. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I navigated to the rules and submissions page. My eyes scanned the fine print, the boring legal jargon that everyone scrolls past. And then I saw it. Section 4, subsection B. For security and verification, the title page of the submitted PDF must include the author's full name, phone number, and email address. This information within the document itself is considered the primary point of contact for the credited author. A new kind of stillness descended. It was the calm before a storm. Lana was arrogant, but she was also hasty. I knew how she worked. She would have downloaded my script file, changed the name on the cover page in a word processor, and then hit Save as PDF without a second thought. But what about the metadata? What about the document properties buried deep within the file, which often auto-populate with the original author's information? What if, in her rush to print and submit, to claim her prize, she had used an old version where I'd left a title page with my contact info buried on page 2 by mistake? It was a long shot, a sliver of a chance, but it was there. She had been meticulous in stealing the narrative and crafting her public lie, but she might have been sloppy with the actual evidence. The call from Leo Vance suddenly made a new kind of sense. He'd said, "I found your name on an old draft in the submission packet." In the submission packet, not on the cover. A packet. A collection of documents. The sliver of hope wasn't a weapon for a confrontation. It was something better. It was a key. It meant the truth might not have to come from my mouth at all. It might already be sitting in a file on some studio executive's computer, waiting. I picked up my purse, my resolve no longer just a shield, but a silent, waiting spear. I was going to that dinner. I was going to sit at that table and watch the performance. And I was going to wait for the author's name to be read aloud. She stole the script. But she might have forgotten to erase the author. Vitrina was exactly the kind of place my parents love. It was less a restaurant and more a theater of wealth, all dark wood, hushed tones, and lighting so dim it felt like a secret. The air smelled of money and expensive perfume. This was their chosen stage for the final act of my erasure, a public coronation for the sister who had taken my place. They had chosen it for its class, for the way its name would sound when they told their friends about the celebration. They had no idea they had actually chosen an execution chamber. I walked in, and the hostess led me toward the back, to a large round table where my family was already holding court. My arrival caused a subtle shift in the atmosphere. I could feel their eyes on me, searching for the cracks. They expected to see the wild-eyed grief of the spurned artist, the puffy redness of someone who had cried all day. Instead, I gave them nothing. I wore a simple black dress. My hair was pulled back and my face was a mask of placid neutrality. I met their gazes, one by one. Lana's triumphant glow flickered for a second, replaced by a flash of nervous uncertainty. My mother's smile became tight, forced. My father cleared his throat, a loud, bluffing sound. My quiet confidence was more unnerving to them than any tantrum would have been. I had refused to play my assigned part. "Maya, you came," my mother said, her voice a little too bright. "You invited me," I replied, my voice even and calm. I took my seat. The chair was heavy, upholstered in velvet. A waiter instantly appeared to fill my water glass. I decided to become an observer, an anthropologist studying a strange and duplicitous tribe. I remained silent through the first part of the dinner. The silence was my weapon. They tried to draw me in, asking pointedly if my little projects were going well, but I gave them only short, non-committal answers. My quiet created a vacuum, and they, being who they are, rushed to fill it with noise. I let them. Oh, I let them. My father stood to give the first toast, his glass of champagne held high. "To Lana," he boomed, his voice full of a pride he had never once shown me. "Who proves that some people dream while others do. She didn't just talk about it. She went out and made it happen. We are so proud." A murmur of agreement went around the table, which included a few of their close friends, brought along to witness the triumph. The words didn't sting. I simply cataloged them. My mother went next, her eyes glistening with practiced tears. "To my brilliant daughter, she worked so hard on this. Nights and weekends just pouring her soul onto the page. To see her talent recognized. It's every mother's dream, pouring her soul onto the page." The phrase was so cliché, so perfectly stolen. I took a bite of my risotto. It was expertly cooked, but I couldn't taste a thing. It was like eating ash. My entire focus was on the woman sitting opposite me. Then it was Lana's turn. She basked in the attention, her face a perfect portrait of humble genius. She let the silence hang for a moment before she began, as if gathering her profound thoughts. "Thank you, everyone," she started, her voice soft and earnest. "This is all just so overwhelming. You know, a story like this, it doesn't really feel like you write it. It feels like it chooses you." She looked around the table, making eye contact with each of their friends. It came from a place of such deep personal truth. I would just sit with my laptop, and I'd think of Grandma, and the words would just flow. "That scene with the soldier at the border?" she said, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "I honestly don't even remember writing it. It felt like a memory that was given to me. It's a story about how mercy can be found in the quietest moments." I could have stopped her. I could have thrown my napkin down and called her a liar, a thief. But that would have been a performance of emotion. And emotion, they had taught me, was my weakness. Facts were my strength. My silence was my power. So I let her continue. Let her weave the beautiful tapestry of her lies. With every word, she was digging her own grave, shoveling the dirt onto her own coffin, and my parents were handing her the spade. I just sat there, watching, my composure a ticking bomb in the center of their celebration. The main courses were cleared. Dessert was being ordered. Lana was laughing, recounting a fabricated anecdote about a breakthrough she had while stuck on a plot point. This was her peak, the absolute zenith of her stolen glory. And then, it happened. My phone, which I had placed face down on the table, buzzed. A low, insistent vibration against the polished wood. Everyone looked at it. It was a disruption in their carefully orchestrated narrative. I'm sure my mother thought it was a telemarketer, an annoying intrusion. I didn't know who it was. I almost let it go to voicemail. But some instinct, some sense that the universe was finally stepping in made me pick it up. The caller ID was a number I didn't recognize. "Excuse me," I said quietly, and answered the call. The entire table went quiet, their attention on me. It was rude, this collective eavesdropping, but it was exactly what I needed. I put the phone to my ear. "Maya?" a voice said. A voice I knew instantly from 100 movies, a voice that was somehow both gravelly and smooth. It was a voice that carried its own authority. He spoke just a little too loudly, the way people do when they're calling from a car or a busy office, not realizing their own volume. "Maya? It's Leo Vance." Time stopped. The air in the restaurant became thick and heavy. I could feel every eye at the table on me, feel the sudden, intense shift in focus. My heart gave one hard, solid thump against my ribs. "Sorry to call you directly," his voice continued, loud enough for everyone at our table, and perhaps the one next to us, to hear with perfect clarity. "But I found your name on an old draft in the submission packet. I have to talk to you about the scene on page 84. It's pure genius." Page 84. The page I was on when my mother's email arrived. The scene with the grandmother. My scene. The smoking gun hadn't just been found. It had been fired, the shot echoing in the dead, shocked silence that had fallen over the table. I looked up from my phone. The transformation was spectacular and instantaneous. The color, the life, the triumphant glow had drained from their faces, leaving behind a waxy gray shock. My father's jaw was slack, his celebratory posture crumbling. My mother's hand was frozen halfway to her water glass, her eyes wide with a horror that was slowly dawning into comprehension. And Lana. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. Her skin, which had been glowing with stolen pride, was now ashen. She looked like she had seen a ghost. My ghost. The author she had tried to erase. They had been exposed. Not by my screaming accusations, which they could have dismissed as hysterics. Not by my tears, which they could have labeled as jealousy, but by an external, unimpeachable source. By the A-list star of the film himself, publicly attributing the genius of the work directly to me. Their lie hadn't just been revealed. It had been publicly, brutally dismantled in front of the very friends they had enlisted as their audience. I took a slow, steadying breath. I held the phone to my ear, breaking eye contact with my sister's horrified stare. I let a moment of that dead, suffocating silence hang in the air, letting the full weight of what had just happened settle on them. Then, I spoke into the phone, my voice the epitome of calm professionalism. "Mr. Vance," I said clearly, "I'd love to talk. Can I call you back in a few minutes?" I didn't wait for his reply. I ended the call and placed my phone back on the table, face down. I looked up and met my mother's gaze, then my father's, then Lana's. I didn't smile. I didn't say a word. I just watched as the world they had built on my back, on my work, on my silence, finally, irrevocably, came crashing down around them. The chaos was just beginning to erupt, but in that moment I was an island of perfect, unassailable calm in the center of the ruins. The silence that followed the click of my phone was different from the one that had preceded it. The first was a shocked, tense silence of disbelief. This one was heavy, suffocating. It was the sound of a world ending. The carefully curated image of the perfect, successful Allister family, an image my parents had spent a lifetime polishing, didn't just crack. It vaporized. The fallout was not loud, at least not at first. It was a quiet, social disintegration. Their friends, the ones who had been nodding along to Lana's performance just moments before, suddenly found their shoes fascinating. A woman named Carol, my mother's closest friend, coughed and made a show of checking her watch. "Oh my goodness, look at the time," she murmured, her eyes flicking everywhere but at my parents. "David and I have that early start tomorrow." Her husband, David, was already pushing his chair back, the sound of its legs scraping against the floor an obscenity in the stillness. They were the first to leave, their hasty goodbyes a jumble of insincere words. They were fleeing a contagion, the contagion of truth. One by one the others followed, each with their own flimsy excuse. They were rats deserting a sinking ship, and the sight of their retreat was more damning than any accusation. They didn't look at me with pity, or at Lana with anger. They just looked embarrassed for my parents and desperate to disassociate themselves from the spectacular implosion. In the span of 5 minutes, the large celebratory table for 10 became a desolate island for 4. What was left was the wreckage, half-eaten desserts, abandoned glasses of champagne, and the thick, unbreathable air of public humiliation. Lana hadn't moved. She was frozen, her face a pale, slack mask. She stared at the spot on the tablecloth where my phone had been, as if she could reverse time by sheer force of will. She was utterly alone, isolated not by walls, but by the undeniable weight of her own lie. My father was staring into the middle distance, his face flushed with a mixture of rage and shame. My mother was the first to break. She let out a small choked sob, but even then, I knew. I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't weeping for my years of pain. She was weeping for her ruined evening. I stood up, placing my napkin calmly on the table. My part in this scene was over. I had no interest in the screaming match that was sure to follow. As I turned to leave, my father's hand shot out and grabbed my arm. "Wait," he said, his voice a low, strained growl. They cornered me by the coat check, away from the prying eyes of the restaurant staff but still trapped in the opulent fishbowl of the lobby. My mother's face was stricken, her makeup streaked with tears. My father looked like a man who had just seen his life savings go up in smoke. This was their moment of confession, not of contrition, but of panicked damage control. We should have believed you, Maya," my father stammered, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. He couldn't meet my eyes. He was looking at the floor, at the wall, anywhere but at the daughter he had so casually sacrificed. "We were just so proud," my mother wept, her voice thin and reedy. "A real success. A script sold, Leo Vance. We just wanted it to be true so badly." I listened to their words and I felt nothing. Not forgiveness, not anger, not even pity. just a profound and weary emptiness. I realize now that an apology is a useless gesture if the person offering it hasn't understood what they're apologizing for. Their apology wasn't for the 1,000 cuts they'd inflicted on me my entire life. It wasn't for dismissing my passion, for belittling my dreams, or for siding so viciously and instinctively with my sister's theft. It was for this, for being caught, for their public humiliation. Their reckoning wasn't about the cruelty they had shown me in private. It was about the shame they were feeling in public. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were sorry for how it made them look. "I have to go," I said. It was all that was left to say. I pulled my arm from my father's grasp, turned my back on their panicked, pleading faces, and walked out into the cool California night. I didn't look back. The next day, the small alignments began. The world started to quietly click back into its rightful shape, not with a bang, but with a series of small, significant gestures. The first was a call from a number with a studio exchange. It was a lawyer from their business affairs department. Her name was Ms. Davies, and her voice was formal, professional, and blessedly devoid of emotion. "Ms. Allister," she said, "I am calling regarding the project currently titled Final Draft. We have been made aware of a potential authorship dispute. I want to assure you we are taking this matter very seriously. Could you confirm that a PDF of the script was submitted by you to a Dr. Albright at USC in May of 2022? The question was so specific, so direct. My heart swelled with a feeling I couldn't immediately name. It was validation. Cold, hard, procedural validation. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and steady. "Yes, I can." "Thank you," she said. "That corroborates evidence found in the submission packet. We will be in touch shortly." The call was over in less than 2 minutes, but it was more meaningful than my parents' entire tear-soaked confession. Later that afternoon, an email appeared in my inbox. The sender was Dr. Albright. The industry gossip had apparently traveled fast. His message was short, but it hit me with the force of a physical embrace. It read, "Maya, I just heard the news through the grapevine. I'm not surprised. I always knew that script was special. Congratulations on finally being seen. Don't let them grind you down. Best, Albright." I read the email 3 times. I always knew that script was special. Those 7 words were the parental blessing I had craved my entire life, delivered not by blood, but by a mentor who had seen my talent, not my potential for his own vicarious glory. These small gestures, these quiet alignments of truth from strangers and old acquaintances, were the real victory. They were building me a new table, one I hadn't had to ask for. The climax of my vindication came late that afternoon. The phone rang, another unfamiliar number. I answered, my stomach tight with anticipation. "May I speak with Maya Allister?" a man's voice asked. It was deep, confident. "This is she, Ms. Allister. This is Robert Sterling, head of production at the studio. First and foremost, on behalf of all of us here, I want to offer you our most sincere and profound apology." The words were so direct, so unambiguous, that I had to sit down. "There was a serious oversight during our vetting process," he continued, "and a grievous error was made. I want to assure you that we have taken immediate action. Our contract with Lana Allister has been terminated, effective immediately, on the grounds of fraud and misrepresentation. We have already initiated legal proceedings." I listened, the words washing over me. Terminated. Fraud. It was all so legal, so final. "The good news, Ms. Allister," he went on, his tone shifting from apologetic to constructive, "is that we still believe this is a phenomenal script. We want to make this film, and we want to make it with its true author. We would like to formally offer you a new contract. A substantially more lucrative one, I might add, to compensate for this entire ordeal. Your agent can expect a call from me within the hour to begin negotiations." I was speechless. My hand was pressed against my mouth, and for the first time tears of actual joy began to stream down my face. This was it. The external, legal, financial validation that confirmed my victory was total and complete. It wasn't just about getting my name on the script. It was about the industry itself acknowledging the wrong and making it right in the most unequivocal way possible. Ms. Alistair, are you still there? Yes. I finally managed to whisper, my voice thick with emotion. Yes, I'm here. As I hung up the phone, a quiet fell over my apartment. But this was a new kind of quiet. It wasn't the silence of loneliness or the stillness of shock. It was the silence of peace. The war was over. I had won. And I could finally feel the first true moment of release, the untensing of a muscle I didn't even know I had been clenching for my entire life. It's been 6 months since the dinner at Vitrina. 6 months since the world I knew fractured and a new one began to take its place. Peace, I've learned, doesn't arrive like a tidal wave. It seeps in slowly, filling the cracks inside you until you realize one day that you're whole again. My apartment is the same, but it feels different. The light that hits my desk in the morning doesn't feel like an interrogator anymore. It feels like an invitation. The blinking cursor is no longer a companion in my loneliness. It's a tool for my trade. My trade. I like the sound of that. My first day on the studio lot felt like stepping into a parallel universe I'd only ever dreamed of. I had my own parking space, my own ID badge with a terrible smiling photo. As I walked past the giant, barn-like sound stages, I held a freshly printed copy of my script. It was heavy in my hands, the pages crisp. And on the cover, in clean black letters, it said, Final Draft, written by Maya Alistair. It wasn't a dream. It was a document. It was real. I was shown into a writer's room, not as an assistant or an intern, but as the writer. The director, a woman I'd admired for years, stood up when I walked in. The producers smiled. They pulled out a chair for me at the table, a table covered in concept art and character sketches, all born from my words. They didn't ask me to get coffee. They asked me what I thought about the grandmother's casting. They asked for my input on the final scene. They listened. The feeling was so new, so profound, it almost hurt. To be seen not as a hobbyist, not as a dreamer, but as a peer, as the architect. This was the world I had fought for, and I had entered it not through a side door, but through the main gate, holding the key I had forged myself. The signing bonus from the studio was, to be blunt, life-changing. It was a number with enough zeros to make me feel dizzy. For a week, I just looked at my bank account, unable to process it. My first instinct, born of years of financial anxiety, was to hoard it, to build a fortress against future uncertainty. But then I thought about Dr. Albright's email. I thought about the version of me who had sent him that desperate message, the girl who just needed one person to say, "Don't you dare give up on this one." So I did something without telling anyone. I contacted my old college and quietly used a portion of the money to establish a scholarship. The Final Draft Grant for young, unrepresented writers who have a story to tell, but don't have the connections or the resources. It wasn't an act of charity, not really. It was an act of correction. It was a way to counter the selfishness that had almost destroyed me, a way to ensure that another writer's voice wouldn't be erased because they didn't have the right last name or the right zip code. My legacy wasn't going to be the family that tried to break me. My true legacy would be this. It was a quiet act of building a longer table instead of just fighting for a seat at the old one. Last week, I had dinner at the Musso Frank Grill. If Vitrina was the theater of new insecure money, Musso's was the cathedral of old Hollywood. It was steeped in history, its red leather booths holding the ghosts of writers and movie stars from 100 years of filmmaking. My dinner companions were Leo Vance and the film's director, Sarah. There were no parents seeking to validate their own lives through my success. There were no friends brought along as an audience. It was just 3 people talking about a story. The thing about page 84, Leo said, leaning forward, his voice low and intense, is that the soldier's silence. I don't think it's just mercy. I think it's recognition. He looks at her, and he sees his own mother, his own sister. He sees the same exhaustion he feels in his own bones. Exactly, Sarah jumped in, her eyes alight. It's not pity. Pity is vertical. He's not looking down on her. It's a horizontal moment. They're two souls on the same level, caught in the same meat grinder of history. I listened to them dissect my work, build on it, elevate it with their own artistry. The atmosphere was electric, a current of pure, collaborative creation. We weren't talking about deals or celebrity or success. We were talking about character, about motivation, about the truth of a moment. This was my new table, a circle of peers who didn't care where I came from, only what I could create. We talked and argued and laughed for hours. I ate a whole plate of pasta and tasted every single bite. I thought I had heard the last of my family. I had blocked their numbers, but I suppose I forgot about the persistence of my mother. 2 nights ago, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number, but I knew who it was before I even read it. The message read, "Maya, it's your mother. I know you're angry, but I'm begging you. Lana has lost everything. Her job, her reputation. She doesn't leave her apartment. She cries all day. Whatever she did, she has paid the price. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive your own sister?" I read the text, and I waited for the familiar ache, the sting of guilt, the pull of familial duty. But nothing came. I felt a distant, clinical sort of pity, the same you might feel for a stranger who has made a series of disastrous life choices. She wasn't asking for forgiveness for Lana. She was asking for absolution for herself. She wanted me to fix the mess, to restore the family image, to make her uncomfortable feelings go away. Forgiveness, I realized, was irrelevant. Forgiveness implies that the relationship is worth salvaging, that their opinion still holds weight. Their approval was no longer the prize. Their judgment was no longer the punishment. They were simply no longer relevant. I held my finger over the message, over their last, desperate attempt to pull me back into their toxic orbit. Then I deleted it without a reply. The door was closed. I had finally, blessedly, walked away. Which leads me to tonight. I'm alone in my apartment. The city glitters outside my window, a sea of a million other stories. On my desk, next to my laptop, is a single sheet of paper. It's the official call sheet for day 1 of filming, which begins tomorrow at dawn. My name is at the top, right under the film's title, written by Maya Alistair. I look at those words, and I think about the journey to get them there. I think about the girl who wrote in the dark, fueled by cold tea and a desperate need to be seen. I think of the woman who sat in a fancy restaurant, her silence a loaded gun. I think of the family who thought her voice could be stolen and sold. They thought my ambition was a cute hobby, a thing they could dismiss. They never understood. My ambition wasn't to be celebrated by them. It was to build a world they couldn't touch. This seat at the table, the one I'm sitting in right now, in the quiet of my own home, on the eve of my own creation, it wasn't an inheritance. It wasn't a gift. It wasn't given to me. This seat was never given. I built it.